You're listening to the Hello World podcast, number 23. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. Today I'm delighted to welcome Phil Haack to the show. Phil Haack works at GitHub finding ways to make it better for .NET and Windows developers everywhere. Prior to GitHub, he was a senior program manager at Microsoft, responsible for shipping ASP.NET MVC, NuGet, among other projects. These projects were released under open source licenses and help serve as an example of the open source model for shipping software to other teams at Microsoft. Today we get to hear Phil explain how he changed his last name to up his credibility in the technology field. Okay, that's not really true, but I'm too in love with the joke to give it up. We do get to talk to him about his TRS-80 color computer when he got started, as well as his trek from California to Seattle and his time at Microsoft and GitHub. Let's take a listen. So today I'd like to welcome Phil Haack to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And, I know you mostly from Microsoft and then, of course, from all your great work at GitHub. Is you still enjoying being there?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Seems like a really good fit.
Yeah, I think so, too. I'm having a really good time.
So when did you change your name to Haack in order to get a good reputation in the tech community? It's an important question. A lot of us want to know.
Well, it was about, I guess I'm giving away my age. It was about 39 years ago when I was in the womb.
You seem to have been destined to it.
Yeah, I mean, it actually turns out that my dad was adopted, so it's quite possible we could have ended up with a different last name. So
interesting.
Yeah, so there's that to consider. But so I'm a hack in some other clothing.
That's funny. So when you were a kid, is that when you got started programming, or was it in college?
My first taste of it was as a kid. My first computer was a Trash 80 or TRS 80 color computer. And I remember fondly that my dad and I would spend hours entering code listings from books or the various computing magazines of the time, like Byte magazine and the others. And so one of the first games I ever played on that computer was a driving game that we had to enter multiple pages of BASIC, followed by hundreds of data lines at the very end, where you're just entering hex codes for effectively what are the resources, right? The graphics, the music, and all that. And any typo just made it all not work. So I just remember this is so burned on my memory. It's spending hours double checking every character, not knowing anything about what we were typing in at the time, right? Because it's just binary data. And then when the game finally worked, how much fun it was and how exciting that was. And from then, I've always had a fascination with programming.
It seems that when there were typos in that code, because I remember typing them in as a kid as well, that it was always in that data code in the end. It was always in those magic numbers. They would have you poke into memory or whatever the language was. And so it wasn't even like you could figure out what the typo was until the next issue came out and they went, oh, yeah, it's supposed to be 252, not 253.
Yeah, idiot. Well, yeah, because any other typos in the main code, you got decent compiler errors or whatnot, and then you could say, oh, there's a error in line 310, because remember every line was a multiple of 10, and you had to type the line numbers in. Yeah. But if it was in the data section, just stuff just didn't work right, and you had no idea.
That's funny. And was that a passion, as you were growing up?
So for a little while, it was a big passion to write code. I was, building little choose your own adventure games, the stuff little kids do.
Yeah.
I started pretty young, but then I really got into bulletin boards and games, and I was living overseas at the time, and so we were trading the games in little clubs and all that. And then pretty much that just like my computer usage was pretty much limited to playing games and fooling around with software, but not really writing code. I didn't really focus my time in writing code for a very long time. I dabble here and there.
Sure.
But most of it was like, hanging out in bulletin boards, becoming a sysop and all that kind of thing.
And did, when you were, playing games, whether you had typed them in or not, did you ever, modify the code to improve your ability to play these games?
No, I didn't really get into that. It's sort of like I took a really long break from serious programming until I was back in college, I think. And I took a C course. I was a math major and I took a C course, and that kind of got me really back into programming again. I mean, throughout that time, I would, write little bits of code here and there, but I just didn't really have any influencers or mentors to kind of get me into the coding aspect. Like I would like use programs to write your own levels and stuff like that, but I wasn't really programming up until college again.
And so C was your first real language that you spent a lot of time in and try to absorb.
Yeah, after basic, it was C and then a bit of C++. I mean, that's pretty much the only courses they offered at my school at the time, even though, there were more modern languages. Well, I shouldn't say modern, but there were languages like Java at the time. And other than that, my school offered C and C++.
Yeah, that wasn't uncommon, especially in the math department.
Yeah.
And so you graduated with a math degree?
That's right.
And what happened with, did you have first jobs while you're in college, or did it happen afterwards?
My first job was after college. So I really enjoyed math. And so but I also did not like being in debt. So I told myself, I'll just, work a year and then I'll, go back to school, grad school and, pursue my PhD. That was sort of like in my mind the only possible path. Obviously, I need to go to grad school and I need to go get my PhD. Like,
right.
It's a lot of my professors were really kind of, pushing me to go straight to grad school. And I said, no, I really want to, take a year, pay off some of this debt and work. Of course, as a math major, like the best jobs available to me at the time were software development jobs.
Yeah.
And, which, at the time I was ill qualified to do any of that. But, I got a job with a small company based in Seal Beach, California, which is about 45 minutes south of Los Angeles and an hour coming back. So if you are familiar with 405 traffic, you'll understand that. I just learned on the job and I just loved it.
Were you doing C languages then, or had it evolved into Java or something?
No, so I was actually doing classic ASP with VBScript as my first job. And it was around the time that classic ASP pretty much just came out. And because I remember when I was interviewing, I was like, asking like, should I learn Perl? I'm going to go get this Perl book. Because I was really worried that like I had my lack of any experience was going to kill me in getting this job. But they were really looking for a college grad, someone to teach, and so I learned on the job.
Nice.
I remember, and it was really great. I just remember my first mentor was this woman who was another. I think she was actually a contractor at this place, and she was kind of walking me through, ADODB.record set and creating, creating record sets to access a database. And I just remember looking at all this VBScript code, thinking like, I have no clue what any of the words coming out of her mouth mean, and I better work hard at this because, it's hard enough not even understanding this new language and web programming at the time, but then accessing a database and what does that even mean?
What is a database? Yeah,
what is a database and all that? But fortunately for me, I was a quick study and I started to really pick things up and the rest is history, as I say.
Yeah. So this had to be what, mid 90s if ASP was the hot commodity.
So it was around 97.
Yeah, that's when I remember being in Boston, and if you had a pulse, we could hire you to write HTML. It's just sort of this thing where we'll train you really, and so. This mentor, was it someone that just encouraged you to learn, or were there lessons about how to become a good programmer that you got from her?
So it was more like she was told to teach this young guy how to write VBScript, and so it was kind of like the basic level, like just get me understanding what VBScript is and what ASP is and what web programming is. A lot of the more like, code complete style things actually came from another person at the company who, told me, buy Code Complete. It's the Bible.
Right.
And I remember when I bought it and started reading it, it was just like the heavens parting. It's like, oh my God, this is like such good stuff. Everybody should read this. And what's interesting is that this person actually works at Microsoft now. He's part of the Xbox team, and I had lunch with him recently, and I was telling him how his advice about Code Complete like just changed the trajectory of my coding career for the most part. It was really cool to run into him again.
Wow, that is great. And so, your sort of trajectory, did you want to stay in web development? Because I know of you, certainly from the ASP.NET team.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because now I'm doing mostly client development, but WPF development. But I really, my heart is really into the web. I mean, the web is, been one of the big, clearly one of the biggest things that happened in technology in a long time.
Sure.
So I really enjoy web development. And, I still kind of dabble. Like right now I was working on Octokit.net, which is a client library to a web API that we provide for the GitHub API. And I was just playing around with it in the context of ASP.NVC because I haven't actually done anything with MVC since leaving Microsoft. So I wanted to kind of toy around with it again and see how it's changed since I've left.
Interesting.
But for the most part, yeah, I mean, the primary product at my company, of course, is GitHub.com. And so a lot of what I'm working with is still web technologies, right? Like even though I'm building a client app, we're constantly calling web APIs to get information. We're dealing with running Git, which works over the network, all this sort of stuff. So it's still, to me, it's sort of part of the, overall web ecosystem. So I still enjoy what I'm doing, even as a, client app developer right now.
So the world has changed between what we used to, call a thick client. Everything has a web component these days. There's no more, local copy of a Access database and just a desktop client that people install. Everything has that sort of connectivity into, even if you're doing client dev, you have to understand HTTP at some point.
Absolutely. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of the way I write WPF code kind of I actually learned these techniques doing web development. For example, because of learning Knockout.js, which is a model view model framework for JavaScript, like a lot of those concepts actually translate naturally over to view models within a WPF application.
Absolutely.
And a lot of web development these days are using things like Ember, Angular, Knockout, what have you, to create this sort of rich client in JavaScript that's just communicating through APIs with the back end. And so we're kind of, in a way, even if you're doing web development, you're sort of doing now persistent, what I might call a stateful client development in the browser versus on the desktop. But it's very similar patterns of coding and accessing the web.
Absolutely. A lot of developers are sort of backing in, that never wanted to do web development, or now backing into it, because they are feeling comfortable with that idea of how, like you said, when I teach web for Silverlight developers, So I can say here, data binding is data binding, and data access is data access, and web APIs are web APIs. It's really no different. It's just JavaScript and HTML instead of C# and XAML.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So let's backtrack a little bit. How did, I know you mostly from Microsoft because you were at Microsoft for quite a long time. How did that, come to be? How did you get from Southern California to Redmond?
That's interesting. So, well, interesting to me at least. I remember I've always been a bit of since I started working, my first job, we were doing ASP, classic ASP. And then I remember when ASP.NET ASP Plus came, became the thing, right? Which was previously codenamed Cool, and then later became ASP.NET. But there was that brief period of time where these books started coming out about this pre-release technology called ASP Plus, the next generation. And I took me and a coworker flew to Redmond to take a class with Jeffrey Richter, the Wintellec guy, and we were just blown away. Just like, wow, it's so cool. So, I really got into ASP.NET web forms at the time, and so I really enjoyed using Microsoft technologies. But I was really happy in LA, so I wasn't really thinking of moving anywhere. But I remember, but then, my wife and I had our son Cody, and I remember this one day where, I was really sort of kind of getting frustrated with the work scene in LA. Like either I found the work uninteresting or just like it's kind of interesting where you're in a community where the industry doesn't refer to tech, but it refers to like Hollywood, right? And I was like, there's just not that many interesting, cool jobs here. Like started to, kind of want more and more to work at a place where I could work on something really big and deep, and a place like Microsoft, of course. And I remember this one day we were walking my son around in a stroller, and we got back to our condo, and he was covered in like soot, just like that soot that's in LA, that haze that hangs around because of all the smog and such.
Wow.
And my wife looked at me and was like, maybe we should look at moving to, maybe you should consider this Microsoft job. And so one day, we went to Seattle to visit some friends of ours who lived there, and we're just kind of staying with them, hanging out. And I was like, can I borrow your car? I just want to kind of go to Microsoft and hang out and see who I see. Literally, I just drove to Microsoft, and I didn't actually know anyone who would be there so much. I just started, kind of talked my way into a building and started walking around. I think I knew one person who showed me around, and then I remember sitting in the lobby and I saw Chris Sells, and and then I was walking around and I ran into Scott Guthrie. And I was like, oh, hey, Scott, everyone had, heard of Scott Guthrie, right? And so he was kind of asking, oh, what are you doing here? I was just looking around, blah, 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 seeing who I run into. And so he's like, oh, well, I have this really cool thing. I got to run a meeting right now, but I got this really cool thing to show you. Are you going to be around later? And I was like, yeah, I'll be around.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, to talk to Scott Guthrie. Yeah, of course I'll be around. And so later on, he came back, and I, went to his office, and he showed me, he wrote some code on the board. It was like public, void, home, blah, 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 render view, all that stuff. And it was the ASP.NET MVC that they had just started working on. And I looked at that, and I said to him, that's cool. How can I work on that?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, let's get the ball rolling. And so from there, I got scheduled on an interview loop. And so at the time, I actually interviewed for two different positions. There was the program manager position for ASP.NET MVC, and there was a developer on the Silverlight toolkit. And they're both, kind of interesting, but I'm kind of glad I, got the one I did, right? Which is
in hindsight.
Yeah. In hindsight, yeah. Especially, but no, I mean, both would have been with really great people. But I was really excited about ASP.NET MVC. Rails had come out and was taking kind of the web development world by storm, and a lot of the monorail had come out before then, and we're showing this different way of approaching the web, which I say different, but it was actually more true to sort of how the web is designed.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited about it, and I feel very lucky that it all worked out, and I got the job, and we moved up to Bellevue, and we really like it here.
It's a great place. I interviewed at Microsoft a couple of times, and I never wanted to live in Redmond or Bellevue. I always wanted to live in Seattle, and the prospect of crossing that bridge every day sort of scared me off.
Yeah. Well, now they have the whole bus system, the Microsoft Kinect bus. Which is Wi-Fi enabled. So I hear from people who take it that it's kind of nice because they just consider that part of their work time, right?
Yeah.
You sit on the bus, get a bunch of work done, and so you can kind of roll that in, and then it doesn't feel like this awful commute. Because part of the problem with commute is like that you can't be doing anything else while you're driving,
or you shouldn't be, right?
Yeah. I remember, oh man, when I used to commute in LA, I would just get so rage induced, like I started to understand road rage, because like getting down to Seal Beach was like 45 minutes, but getting back could take an hour and a half at times. And then my company moved to Santa Monica, which is really close to where I lived. And it's just so much better. I became a much calmer person. And so I realized that like any job where you don't have to commute a long ways is worth a lot. It's very valuable.
Who did you consider at Microsoft, some of your favorite mentors? I mean, because there's such a good talent pool, especially in the teams you were on.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, early on there was, my manager was Simon Calvert, who he's great. There was Brad Abrams, who he was very popular among .NET developers at the time, and he since went to Google. But he taught me a lot of good things about being a kind of a conciliatory PM, like working with other teams. Scott Guthrie, of course. I mean, like he's a brilliant person. And then later on, I had a Scott Hunter, who was my manager. And he and I still, hang out often since he lives up here. On the developer side, there's people like the dev lead for ASP.NET MVC at the time, Alon Lipton, who some people have met through MVP summits and whatnot. David Fowler comes to mind as like one of my favorite people to work with over there. I mean, a lot of people I could name, but those are some of the names that come to mind of people who I've learned a lot from or really enjoyed working with, who I thought had really good insight. And I'm sure I'm missing other people who, are going to feel offended. I didn't name them, but yeah, there was a lot of good people, and a lot of people I felt like who really got it over there, and I feel like it was a privilege to work with those people at Microsoft.
So did whether in your current job or at Microsoft or even before, did you ever take the role of being mentor to sort of up and comers, as it were? And what's that experience like?
So before I was at Microsoft, at my first job, I rose up to be the development manager at the company. So all the developers reported to me, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. There's something about trying to recognize young talent and kind of help them along that's really appealing to me. What sucked was when we had to do a round of layoffs, and I had to be the one to tell some of those that they no longer had a job. That was not pleasant at all. At Microsoft, I didn't do a whole lot of official mentoring at all in any capacity. Apart from just the general, trying to help people out as I do. I feel like a lot, like these days, a lot more of my mentoring is more done through my blog, where I try to share whatever things that might help other people out that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That there's things have evolved from there, certainly from where they used to be, where the only people you'd have an impact on were or down the hall or in the cube next to you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think I wasn't a manager at Microsoft, but I hope that, I helped, mentor some people through just kind of bringing in for example, just bringing in an industry outsider experience, perspective to things. Because, there are a lot of people at Microsoft who have, joined right out of college and, their only experience is what has happened at Microsoft.
Right.
And I don't say that to invalidate that experience. I think that's a very important and valuable experience as well. But it's, even more important to kind of recognize that there are these other experiences and different, jobs, different types of work that are equally valid and important to understand, especially if they're your customers.
Absolutely.
And if you can't empathize for your customers, then it's really hard to meet their needs and address their needs. And so, and I think this is one area where, like, especially very recently, we've seen Microsoft improve a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be a bit more of an ivory tower. I think they're getting much better at that now. So are you almost finished paying off your debt so you can get back to graduate school?
Well, I've paid off my college debt a long time ago, but now that I've been on the outside long enough, I was talking to someone about this just recently, about this concept of like software in academia versus software outside of academia. And this was an academic I was speaking to in a podcast that will come out, a separate podcast. But anyways, he kind of volunteered that he felt that, this is an area where he wishes academia was leading, but is clearly following what the technology industry is doing.
Yeah.
And so, like, it seems to me that I don't really have any. Oh, shoot! Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. We can edit that out.
Yeah, I don't really have any strong desire to go back to school, at least not full time. I mean, there's a part of me that really would like to get a stronger computer science foundation. But, being a parent and having a full-time job and having open source hobbies, I pretty much have all my time accounted for at the moment.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I like about, this work is that, for those of us, and I think that there's a lot of us out there who part of the reason we ended up in this industry is we love to learn. And, it's constantly evolving enough that you can feed that need to, it's not just about, okay, I now know how to, create rivets, so I'm going to rivet every day. It's, there's these 14 new fasteners coming out and only 2 of them will be successful. And sort of seeing what's coming up on the, the horizon, whether created by people like us or created by other groups.
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating. Like, there's always something to learn, and I'm really excited to, learn as much as I can. On the flip side, what's really exciting too is that there's always people who know a lot more than you about various topics, and if you form a well-structured team, like there's always people who can kind of fill in the knowledge that you don't have, and you can help fill in the skills that they don't necessarily have, while also teaching each other. So, like, on my team, there's if there's a more computer sciencey thing I don't really understand, I know who to ask. Or if there's something in the Windows kernel type thing, I just go to Paul Betts. That sort of thing. Like, there's always someone I can talk to about to help sort of fill in the gaps in my knowledge, while I, at the same time try to work to fix those gaps. Pause for a second. Do you hear that background noise?
Vaguely, but I don't think I think it'll drop out with the noise reduction.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, someone's vacuuming upstairs. I was like, I did not anticipate that.
No, we don't. I don't ever record on Mondays because the place I live has decided that they're going to leaf blow every Monday for about 4 hours.
That sucks.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. And you work from home?
I do.
Yeah,
I do for now. I'm doing mostly plural site, so it's a little different. Because I have to find time to record as a part of the major work I do. So,
yeah.
So let's talk about one other topic I'm really interested in, and that is languages. And you started in college with C and C++, and then went into VBScript, and then I sort of assume C# when you joined Microsoft and started to work with MVC, or even actually before then, probably with ASP Plus and ASP.NET. Is that a language you're passionate about, or a language is more of a tool that are just there to help you solve problems?
A little. I mean, I think both are true. Sorry, they're right above me now, so
we could just wait a minute.
Yeah, they'll be done, and they'll be at least like when they're not right above me, it won't be so distracting.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. All right.
This is the problem of having good mics, right? Now
Yeah,
they can pick up everything.
Can you hear it now? That it's right above me?
Nope.
No?
Oh,
okay.
We're good.
Well then let me restart. So I think both are true. I actually started, like you said, with C, C++, and then moved into VBScript and then Visual Basic. We started for a period of time. I read the Dan Appleman book, and then I was like, okay, we got to write everything as Visual Basic COM component, and our ASP our VBScript just calls into Visual Basic 6. And then it got into C# when I learned ASP.NET, and so for a while, before Microsoft, I did C# development because I started to move around a few jobs, and at each place I did a ton of C# work. And then, one place I actually had to write Visual Basic code to translate proprietary Fortran to Fortran 77. So, I get to work with a variety of languages. And then, at Microsoft, obviously, I worked, primarily in C#. And I really like C#. I think it's a great language. It's got a lot of potential. But the other language I sort of started to fall in love with while at Microsoft was JavaScript. Mm-hmm. And when I really got into JavaScript was after reading the Douglas Crockford book, the JavaScript, The Good Parts. Mm-hmm. And I was working on a web form control. Actually, I was working on the update to the menu control, where we were going to make it a little more modern, and so I actually wrote a lot of the JavaScript for that control, and I was trying to follow these really nice practices that I learned from the Crockford book, and I realized yes, JavaScript has a ton of faults, but it's a kind of a neat language in its functional aspect, and it's and its prototypical inheritance, which kind of you have to get used to when you're used to object-oriented programming. And so these days, at GitHub, I got really into reactive programming, which is still C#, but using reactive extensions, right, and then reactive UI. And that is a very, functional paradigm. And now, that kind of got me into learning about F# and, dabbling in sort of wanting to learn about Haskell, but I'm really kind of into F# these days, and I haven't done any real programming with it yet, but I'm hoping to spend more time with it because I'm finding that programming is just amazingly complicated, and no matter how good you are, you're going to make mistakes, right?
Of course. And
a lot of languages make it very easy to make those mistakes. I mean, the Apple, double goto comes to mind. The OpenSSL, Heartbleed disaster comes to mind. And it's for a long time, we've had these languages that remove these whole classes of bugs, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's yes, these languages are not a panacea. It's very easy to write new types of bugs in them. But, when you only have to worry about, let's say, half of the types of bugs you could write, or a quarter of the bugs, or 1/10 of the bugs, that makes it easier for you to focus on, correctness of the other kinds of bugs that a language can't fix for you, right? And so I'm really into this idea of languages that sort of that remove the possibility of these whole classes of bugs, like with F#, null references, pretty much eliminates this concept of null references.
Yeah.
With Haskell takes it, a real strong approach where it makes mutation, like where you want to mutate the state, something that you have to opt in explicitly. And I sort of like this idea, like, the more we get into async programming, for example, you find that like mutability is kind of a problem, and null references, it's been called the $1 billion mistake, right?
Yeah.
And so but there's always these situations where you need to do these things, right? I need to mutate some state, or I need a null, something or other. And so these languages that are a bit pragmatic about it are saying, well, we're not saying you can't do these things. We're just saying that by default you can't do these things, and when you need to do them, you have to be explicit. You have to opt in, rather than opting out of bad behavior. You have to opt into the bad behavior, or the potentially bad behavior,
or the more dangerous behavior.
Yeah, or the dangerous behavior. And I really like that, because for the most part, as careful as as anyone can be, they're going to make mistakes. But when, like those potential spots for mistakes are very explicit, when you have to sort of opt in, and kind of triggers your mind to say, oh, I better think about this carefully because I'm turning on the safety bounds, right? It's kind of like, unsafe keyword in C#, right?
Absolutely.
Like that unsafe keyword is there for a reason. It's letting you know that you're doing something that might be, well, unsafe. And so I really like these languages that are kind of getting really good at being making you be explicit about behaviors that could be problematic.
Absolutely.
And so I hope to see more development in that area.
So I can assume that the next version of GitHub for Windows is going to be all F#. Is that?
Not quite. We'll see. Maybe down the road there will be I do have one other, coworker at GitHub who's probably even more excited about F# than me, which is Drew Miller. But I'm not so sure about everyone else. I think one of the tricky pragmatic challenges of something like F# is that, like, you limit your pool of people who already know this language and are willing to learn it, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very different model for C#. But then again, if you hire really smart, really good people, they'll be able to learn it, and that won't be a problem.
Right. And it's just a matter of, at some point it's a buy-in discussion, right? It's not, can they learn it, but will they learn it?
That's exactly it. It's like, like some people get really tied to the language that they know.
Mm-hmm.
They spend so much time learning this language. And so, it's very hard to convince them to, try a different language.
Especially
but when you frame it,
struggle at first. And there's that, there's that moment of, I must be an idiot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you feel like there's this built up, like, there's in my view, it's more of a sunk cost, right? It's that, you've spent all this time learning C#, but what you really have learned is, just hopefully good techniques of programming that apply in no matter what language you use, like encapsulation and that sort of thing, being explicit where it's needed. So hopefully, but the transition from C# to another imperative or object-oriented language is an easy jump for C# to a truly functional language. So I do understand that like the jump to F# is a pretty big paradigm shift.
But even if F# isn't your language, learning it can inform in a good way the other languages you're working with, like C#. I mean, I found this. When I started learning Node, that it helped me create better MVC apps. Because once I understood, this is, because it's the default behavior there, and there are things I can learn in, what feels like the tried and true way of developing web apps, in my own world right now. And so when you learn Node, you kind of see that. And that's the same when you look at another language. You're able to, it's not like you're going to dump C# because you know F#, but it may at worst inform you to start thinking about things more safely, more thinking about mutation differently is a sort of an obvious example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find that, and especially because C# has a lot of really great functional features, right? They're not to the level of F#, but and especially if you're doing reactive programming, like a lot of the concepts you learn in F# apply, and I start to write my C# code even a little more functionally where it makes sense. I think the hard part is that you start to like learn these constructs in F# that just make things so elegant and beautiful, and then you go back to the C# and everything looks, like kind of ugly and cumbersome
Sure.
in comparison,
and filled with ceremony.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
But it's ceremony I'm kind of used to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, I'm still at the point where it's just more comfortable for me to write C# code. But every time I do anything in F#, I kind of think, oh, I wish I had that in C#. But eventually, I hope to get to the point where I'm like, oh, well, I'll just write in F# and then I will have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, once it becomes once you start dreaming in F#, like they talk about with foreign languages, you can finally be creative in it. You're not just wrestling with the syntax, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks.
And I hope everything goes well at GitHub, and that you continue to enjoy Washington State.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful up here, especially in the summers.
I think you mean only in the summers, right?
I was being diplomatic to the weather here. Yeah. Actually, this winter wasn't so bad. I mean, it's a little gray, but it wasn't too bad. And but the spring is shaping up pretty nicely. Sunny right now, at least. I'm
always fascinated that Atlanta gets more rain than Seattle. We get drops. We don't get mist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think, like a lot of the Seattle rain stories is just, it's a little overblown. And the story is that it's to keep Californians from wanting to move here.
That's
don't tell them it doesn't actually rain all that much, because then they'll all move up here and buy up all the property
and ruin it.
Yeah, and I kind of moved here from California, so there's that.
That's true.